Like many people in their 20s, I enjoyed writing my opinion online. Not often controversial, sometimes not, but always an opinion. I would put it out there, sometimes get comments, sometimes not. Most common comment from the same individual went something like this: Jay is pompous. Jay is full of himself. Jay doesn't know what real life is like. He's never really had to work hard for anything. It's always been given to him. You know, he's got friends in the right places. He's got friends that will clean up the messes that he makes. Okay. You get used to that. You see that over and over from the same person, and it gets to be normal. So a regular, any day, I'm typing, I'm putting out my opinion. My same disillusioned commenter makes a similar statement. Okay, I get it. Everybody's entitled to an opinion. So I move on, and I come back a little bit later, and there's another comment backing up the previous one, yet this is anonymous. I agree. Jay doesn't know what real life is like. One day it's going to come back and bite him. We'll be there to say, I told you so. It's kind of odd. It's a little bit out of nowhere. So I start looking, start seeing who this anonymous person can be, looking at other comments, and I see the name, and it doesn't make sense. I see the email address, and it's the same one that I've used with this same person who just 2 days ago we were out to dinner, and for the last 4 years we've been hanging out. I thought, been good friends. And so I read this comment, this affirmation of what a seemingly detached and unaware life that I live, and I reach out and I say, hey, I kind of got a weird comment. It's got your name on it. Is everything okay? No response. Silence. I reach out again. Nothing. I reach out a third time. And I realize there will be no response because I've been betrayed. You see, I thought that I had a really close friend. I thought that I had someone who I could trust, who had my back, who would be with me in the good and the bad. And it turns out I apparently had an actor, someone who thought the best choice was to be a friend at some times and then flip 180 at a moment's notice. And I think that betrayal is one of the most difficult things that as human beings we deal with, let alone as followers of Jesus. If it were an enemy, if it were somebody that I expected to hurt me, to want to see something negative happen to me, that's one thing. But it's a friend. It's someone who I trusted. And when you think about betrayal and going through betrayal, you don't go through betrayal on a mountaintop. You don't experience betrayal and think that things are going great. When you experience betrayal, you're at a low point. You're in a valley. And as I studied betrayal, and as I looked in the Bible for different stories, the most obvious example of betrayal would be Judas. And so I specifically chose not to talk about Judas today. Because we're followers of Jesus. We're trying to be more like Jesus, but when we walk out today, I want us, if we are dealing with betrayal, to figure out how to overcome betrayal. And it would be too easy for me to hear a story about how Jesus overcame betrayal and think, well, he's Jesus. I'm never going to be there. And continue to suffer and go through the difficulties that are betrayal. So today we're going to talk about somebody that I previously did not know existed. I don't know if this is good or bad. Like maybe I'm going to say his name and you guys are all going to be like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with Jay? How did he not know about this person in the Bible? And there's also a possibility I'm going to mispronounce his name because it's an Old Testament name, and that's what happens in the Old Testament. They have long, crazy names. But it is the relationship between David and Ahithophel. And the story that I always learned, and the story that I was familiar with, was David and Absalom. And just for a quick background, to catch you up if you're like me and you're unfamiliar with the story, one of David's sons, Amnon, had an inappropriate relationship with one of David's daughters, Tamar. Absalom, also one of David's sons, found out about this and was fueled with rage. I'm reading this story and I'm feeling like Maury is going to use this in a show coming up, or that this is like, you know, the layout for a Jerry Springer episode. This stuff that happens is so crazy. And somehow Absalom is able to wait for 2 years before finding the perfect opportunity to take revenge on Amnon. And Absalom has Amnon killed and then takes off to hide. So not only has King David experienced this inappropriate relationship between one of his sons and daughters, he's now lost a son to death and lost a son because he left. After a few years, David has Absalom come back, but there's no interaction between David and Absalom. he just brings him back into the city. Absalom begins to woo the people of Jerusalem. He's already described as the best looking man in the entire city. They said when he would cut his hair once a year, the hair that would be cut off would weigh 5 pounds. He would stand at the gate, and as people came and they'd find out he was a son of the king, they would bow down before him, and instead of receiving that adulation, he would get down with them, give them kisses, fake that he was this humble person. They would come to the gate looking for one of David's representatives to mediate a discrepancy. They wouldn't be there, and Absalom would say things like, well, you know, if I was the king, I could take care of this for you. I would make sure that I would meet your need, or that a representative would be here. But King David, he's too high and mighty. He doesn't have time for the little people. So basically, he was a politician. We see that play out every 2 years. Find the people that don't have a voice, the people that feel disenfranchised, and tell them how much power they're going to have if you are in charge. And over time, Absalom wooed the Jewish people to the point that he was able to overthrow his father David. David went on the run, and while on the run, found out his number one confidant, the person that he always went to, Ahithophel, had joined Absalom. I tried to do a lot of reading on Ahithophel this week, and there's just not that much out there. Made me feel a little better that I hadn't heard of him before. But some people say, in the commentaries that I read, that his wisdom was so perfect every time, they actually thought of him basically as an oracle from God Almighty. And some of the other people I read said that his relationship with Ahithophel was similar to that he had with Jonathan. A brotherly love that was so tight and so connected. And in what is one of David's lowest points, his son overthrowing him, he also loses Ahithophel to Absalom. And it is at this point in David's life that he writes Psalms 55. And we're going to look at together this morning Psalms 55 and what it takes for us to overcome betrayal. If you are using the Pew Bible, Psalms 55 is on page 568. It's 23 verses. I promise I'm not going to stand up here and read all 23 consecutively to you. We're going to break it apart. I'm a teacher, and I like to see the steps laid out for me. There's a lot of confusion about this psalm because it doesn't make any sense when you read it in its native language. Pronouns are in the wrong place. Stuff is flipped. Some people think it's actually a combination of two different psalms that were pushed together. And really, what I think probably was the most common explanation in the commentaries is that David was so agitated, so frustrated so in anguish of what was happening, he couldn't even express it. And it doesn't make any sense. And we're going to look at some of the ebb and flow that he goes through. But let's start and read the first 8 verses. Listen to my prayer, O God. Do not ignore my plea. Hear me and answer me. My thoughts trouble me, and I am distraught because of what my enemy is saying, because of the threats of the wicked. For they bring down suffering on me and assail me in their anger. My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen on me. Fear and trembling have beset me. Horror has overwhelmed me. I said, oh, that I had the wings of a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. I would flee far away and stay in the desert. I would hurry to my place of shelter, far from the tempest and storm. I think the big takeaway for the beginning of this psalm, for what David is going through, is that it is completely natural when we are experiencing betrayal to grieve, to be in anguish. I started just thinking about how I would describe betrayal. And I wrote down some different words, and I tried to kind of mentally think through what that would look like, but really the best description that I could come up with was a punch in the gut. You don't get punched in the stomach and get that feeling unless it's by surprise. I have numerous six-packs that are just buried under here. But if I see someone coming with a balled-up fist and they're aiming for me, I'm going to tighten up, and it's not going to feel great, but it's not going to feel like a punch in the gut. Because it hits you by surprise. It catches you in your throat. It bends you over a little bit. You don't know exactly what happened. Where'd it come from? It takes you by surprise. And that's how it is with betrayal. And an enemy, someone who's out to get you, can't betray you. There's an implied amount of trust that has to be there for betrayal to occur. I remember in my particular instance with this friend reaching out and getting nothing back. So I wrote a letter and just expressed my disbelief, my confusion. Like, how is it that you can say this, but all of these things have happened over the last few years? And never once in those last few years did any of this come up. Have you felt like this the whole time? Have you been living two lives? Do you talk about this when I'm not around? What's going on? And I sat in the church office reading the letter to my dad, and I couldn't get through it. Like, my voice is cracking and breaking because I don't understand where it came from. Not this person. Not that. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to experience confusion and not really know what your first step needs to be. Let's keep reading. Verse 9. Lord, confuse the wicked, confound their words. For I see violence and strife in the city. Day and night they prowl about on its walls. Malice and abuse are within it. Destructive forces are at work in the city. Threats and lies never leave its streets. If an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it. If a foe were rising against me, I could hide, but it is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend, with whom I once enjoyed sweet fellowship at the house of God as we walked about among the worshipers. And again, the pain of betrayal is who is doing it to you. The previous relationship you had with them, you can see that being completely severed and broken down. Let's finish with 15. Let death take my enemies by surprise. Let them go down alive to the realm of the dead, for evil finds lodging among them. It's not exactly the most wonderful description of somebody who was just your friend, but watch these last few verses as David experiences what so many of us experience, the anger and then the reminder of God. The anger and then the reminder of God. So 15, he starts, let death take my enemies by surprise. And then 16, the ebb and the flow. 16, as for me, I call to God, and the Lord saves me. Evening, morning, and noon, I cry out in distress, and he hears my voice. He rescues me unharmed from the battle waged against me, even though many oppose me. God, who is enthroned from of old, who does not change, he will hear them and humble them, because they have no fear of God. And here he goes back. My companion attacks his friends. He violates his covenant. His talk is smooth as butter, yet war is in his heart. His words are more soothing than oil, yet they are drawn swords. And he comes back again. Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken, but you, God, will bring down the wicked into the pit of decay. The bloodthirsty and deceitful will not live out half their days. But as for me, I trust in you. And I feel like that's what the valley is like. I feel like it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. The speed at which you get into the valley is most often completely unrelated to the speed with which you get out. But I think that what we can learn today from this story is how to move through the valley, is how to get to a place where we know David got to, and that is to trust in God. Because at the end of it all, that's where he settles. That's where he finishes. But as for me, I trust in you. I think that there are 2 important questions that as followers of Christ we should ask when we are going through or when we have experienced betrayal. They are, what can I learn from this? And how can God use this? Let me openly and honestly say, not the first 2 questions that come to my mind. Not then, not now. But now, when I'm experiencing a valley, if I'm going through a tough time, I can get to those questions a little quicker. I think the most common question is, why me? Or, what have I done to deserve this? And I think that's normal. But if we continue to ask that question, we continue to allow ourselves to stay in the valley. When I was reflecting on the relationship that had ended so negatively, I had some really strong Christian men in my life give me counsel, to tell me the important first thing is to go to God. And as you can see from what David said here, God doesn't need you to be PC. God's interested in a relationship with you. He wants to know when things are down in the dumps. He wants to know when things are great. He wants your honest relationship. And David models that for us here. He's completely open and honest with God. Now, something that David did a much better job of than I did, David asks God to have the final word. Whereas I ask God if I can have the final word. You know what would be really great, God, is if I could do X, Y, and Z and really get some good revenge. If I could lay this out and take care of this business myself, that would be a lesson to anybody else that they know that you better not do those kinds of things, say those kinds of things, act that way. But that's about me wanting to be in control. And when we say the Lord's Prayer, we say, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." And so if I am going to expect God to forgive me, I have to be able to do the same thing to others. So I think if we're going to overcome betrayal, our first step is to go to God. To go to God openly, to go to God honestly, tell Him how much it stinks, tell Him how much you dislike what's happening. Talk to Him. Because I think that's when we are interacting with God that we begin to see strongly the contrast between man and God. That God will never let us down. That God will never break a promise. That when we have faith in Him, that faith will never grow dry. He is always, always, always there. So when I think about these questions, I reflect now, like what did I learn from that experience? I think that I learned the significance of having individuals in your life who can provide you godly counsel. The significance of people in your life who won't just say, just pray about it. Oh, it'll be okay. You know, that kind of stuff happens. Well, you know, not being flippant with the situation, but someone who will listen, who will in some cases grieve with you, but will point you to God. Won't try to put blame on you, won't try to put blame on the other person, but will point you to God. Because if you're truly going to learn something, it's going to be because something else was screwed up. You know, I think about being a teacher. Students getting questions wrong or getting problems wrong and they get a poor grade. The poor grade is never a punishment. The poor grade is never where a teacher wants to finish. The poor grade is a reminder of the opportunities for learning. The poor grade shows us where we can continue to improve. And so I think that when I reflect on myself and what I learned, when you're betrayed, you immediately want to go inside and not trust anybody ever. There were numerous conversations where I told somebody, you know what? I don't need any more friends. I had 12. I've got 10. 10's enough. But it's through that counsel, and it's through that reminder that if I'm going to be salt and light, I've got to be open. I've got to be willing to trust people. Because without trust, you can't truly build a friendship or get to know anybody better. The second question, how can God use this? Zero fun. I don't want to go through hard things so that God can use it for somebody else. That probably makes me a horrible person. But if someone came to you and said, hey, I'm going to beat the heck out of you so somebody else will know something about not getting beat up, be like, whoa, hey, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be something different that we can do. No, I need you to experience a really hard thing so that you can help other people who are going through that really hard thing. Let me just tell them about it. I'll just be like, yeah, it stinks. But, do this, do that. And so I think that God uses our struggles, our valleys, our betrayals to help other people. I think that our difficulties, when we allow them, can help other people through their difficulties. I could have stayed in the valley. I could have decided I'm not ever going to be a friend with anybody else. I don't want to talk to anybody else. I'll learn your name, shake your hand, and smile. It's good enough for me. But it's through moving through that valley that I can have conversations with people who are going through betrayals and try to help them and try to move them through and move them along. Because it's not fun. It's really, really painful. Bad stuff is bad enough on its own. But when it's your friend, when it's your confidant, when it's your spouse, when it's someone that you've invested so much in, it's a punch to the gut. So I look at David and I think about what lessons he learned, what things he got from this. How did God use David's story to help other people? And I think about myself. I'm like, yeah, David's story did help me. Because when I look at going through a valley now, I know to go to God first. When I see other people struggling, going through a valley, I can go to them to be a shoulder, to be someone who helps to prop them up and walk with them through the valley. So I would encourage you today, if you're going through betrayal, if you've been through betrayal and you haven't worked through it, go to God first. He can and He will get you through this valley and use it to help other people. And if we are going to be people who model the love of Jesus, being able to come alongside people during their suffering is a really significant part of love. Let's pray.